Hi, everyone. It is such an honor to be here today for Sabine's annual festival. I know I should be calling it Sabine's annual festival, but for me, this is how I got to know Sabine through the Ananke Women in Literature Festival. And I think we're going on 5 years of this for me. And it's been an absolute delight every year to be a part of this event for Yoda Press, which I represent, to get so intimately involved with Ananke and its work as a magazine and as an annual festival for women in writing, and just to be able to soak oneself in these discussions on writing by women from across South Asia, the Middle East, African countries, and also the Far East. Um, I am particularly delighted today to be moderating what has also become a bit of an annual fixture, thanks to Sabine, which is the Yoda Press panel at the Ananke Women in Literature Festival. And even more delighted to be bringing to you three of my wonderful, wonderful authors from Yoda Press, who have two of whose books have just come out and are getting a lot of eyeballs. And you'll know in a minute why. And another book which should be out next month. And just the cover reveal of that book has led to a lot of interesting feedback. And we're very delighted to bring you all three texts. So, big warm welcome to you, Neeta, Namita, and Arshi. Also want to quickly add that Neeta's book is called The Feared, with a subtitle that goes 11 Conversations with Political Prisoners. Namita's book is called Farmers' Protest, with an exclamation mark at the end, and a subtitle which says A Movement for Our Times. And Arshi's book is called Yaadgah, Memories of Srinagar. So, you know, part of the reason why these three books are so perfectly sort of absolutely, made to be part of a discussion at a Women in Literature festival, whose tagline this time is speaking truth to power. So, hello, all three of you, and I'm just going to kind of keep it as sort of casual and free flowing as possible. So, if you all want to talk to each other as well, I'm very happy to do that. As I told you earlier, what I've thought of is four sort of broad questions, and then we can talk a little within each. And I think that should cover the span of an hour. Yeah. So the first question, obviously, that I want to put to each one of you is about um, the the idea behind each of these books. And of course, it'd be lovely if you also, as we began talking about your book, first repeated the title of the book so our viewers and our listeners know exactly which one you have worked on. Um, and maybe I'll go chronologically. Neeta, yours was out first. So perhaps I'll go to you first.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Arpita, for this. So, The Fear Conversations with 11 Political Prisoners is, it evolved after I started interviewing political prisoners, not of any specific case, but first who I interviewed was Sudha Bharadwaj, the advocate
Mm.
trade union leader. That interview is special because that was the first one. And initially, nobody had gone to interview her because, see, I have covered courts all my life. I do know what sub judice is, but this was unprecedented. For the very first time, you have the Indian judiciary that has put severe conditions on these Bhima Koregaon, Elgar Parishad accused,
Right.
and very strict restrictions like they are exiled. They are, in Marathi, there's a term called tadipar, and that is
Mm.
always
Yeah.
associated, I think it's even in Hindi, for very hardened criminals who should not have any influence on the society. Can you
mm,
imagine that you have 15 people who are accomplished personalities across the
mm,
society and who have been put under these kind of restrictions? One of which, amongst the five restrictions of Sudha was that she would be in exile along with Hemlata's husband, that is Varavara Rao, and so on.
yeah.
So it got me it was very intriguing that I need to speak to them. And obviously, I wouldn't have spoken about the case. After I spoke to her, I came across some other people who have nothing to do with Bhima Koregaon. And I had friends who had, in the meantime, been telling me, like, after over 30 plus years of experience as a journalist, why don't you write a book? I would have written a book which I always felt was to do with real life, real
Mm,
stories, because I'm a journalist. And I also, it came at a time when, since 2020, not me alone, many of us journalists were out of work, out of jobs.
right.
The dispensation being the way it has been. So I just got myself that space and time to think of a book. And I
Mm,
thought of, you know, if it's something to do with real stories, then it has to be political prisoners. But this book would have been incomplete had I not spoken to people like Dr. Binayak Sen, who's
yeah.
severely impacted after twice uh, incarceration, one of which is he is slowed down. He has neurological problems, along with the fact that he had fallen.
Mm,
And then I realized that, you have to go beyond. And these are stories that people are waiting to hear. Initially, I thought, okay, let me see if I can go beyond adapting these interviews in any other style. But
mm,
the subjects were not keen that I move away from the format which was interviews. So I do think that there is scope for it. And
yeah.
I will also admit that I spoke to people individually, like some students, some colleagues, and I asked if there were stories, real life stories, and they were in an interview format, would you read? Surprisingly, I got a very positive response. So I went ahead.
Yes. Yeah, and I'll tell you something before I move on to asking Namita. I'll tell you something. My 13-year-old is just reading your book because he's very interested in history and politics. And yeah, he's a bit of a nerd. And one of the reasons why he is reading it I mean, he picked it up and started reading it so easily, he said, it's because it is in the interview format. And I think it really appeals to a lot of young people, who are very interested in these matters, but very often something in a different format, a much more sort of, jargon heavy and intimidating format leaves them cold. So I think you were absolutely right about the interview's decision. Namita, moving on to you. So I know what you're going to say when I ask you what is the idea behind the book, but maybe you will leave that part out and move to the rest of it. Yeah, I think you have to unmute yourself, Amita. Yeah.
Sorry. So, the idea behind my book, which is called The Farmers' Protest with an exclamation mark and
Mm-hmm.
a movement for our times. So, the idea was I'll start very briefly with my first book, which was a novel, which was basically about a social worker who goes to rural India. And during one of her journeys, she meets a lot of farmers. And at that point, I realized, and this was in maybe 2009, I realized I don't know much about farmers, and I started reading about it. And I spoke to journalists about, because there were stories on farmer suicides in the newspapers those days. And then somehow the story in that book changed from the social worker story to the farmers' stories.
Mm,
And farmers became an important part of that novel. And then some years later, which was, I joined Pari as a managing editor. So, as part of the work, We were publishing a lot of stories on farmers, and it I sort of learned more and more about their lives, their livelihood, and the problems that they face. So when the three farm laws were brought in, and even before that, there were farmers' protests of 2008 when farmers marched from Nasik to Mumbai. Then in uh, 2000, I'm sorry, I got the date, the year wrong. It was in 2016 and 17. And then there were protests in 2018, which was
18 as well.
the Kisan Mukti Morcha, which happened in
Mm.
Delhi. And during that protest, a team from Pari was there in Delhi, and I was also one of them. And that was my first experience of meeting many farmers closely and speaking to them. So this was my background experience in 2020, when we were going through the pandemic and lockdown. Suddenly these three farm laws were brought in as ordinances in June 2020, and then they were made into laws in September 2020, and it happened so swiftly. The idea behind them was, the government claimed it was for agricultural reform, but there were a lot of nuances within each of those three laws which were actually not beneficial for farmers. And there were some clauses in those which were actually against a democratic setup. Things like you cannot approach courts for grievances, and there would be
Mm.
administrative officer level intervention only, which would be possible, and many such clauses. So it became important for me to understand that, and also to what was happening around us in cities. Now, I've always lived in cities. People were, although they were curious, many of them were very much against the farmers in their minds, like, what's the problem with these farmers, why are they coming onto the streets, and there are traffic jams because of them, when actually the barricades that were put out there were put out by the government, by the administration, not by the farmers, because to
Mm.
prevent the farmers from coming in. So they were made to wait at the protest sites, which were beyond the Delhi city borders. And what were these laws? The first law, which was called the APMC bypass law, that was to deregulate the agricultural markets.
Yeah.
And they were supposed to increase competition, give more choices to farmers, but then you were pitting small and marginal farmers, a majority of them, against large corporates.
Yeah.
Then there was the contract farming law, which again did something very similar. And there was the Essential Commodities Act, which was modified to make it easier to, for big agribusinesses to store grain,
Mm.
etc. And so many of these aspects were not just anti farmer, but they were also anti consumer. And people were not aware of them. And the entire farmers' protest and the resultant coverage in the media, the mainstream media, the television, became polarized. So instead of people understanding, they would think that, oh, this is all some conspiracy, and people abroad are sending money for this to
They
disrupt.
wouldn't even engage. I
There
felt they
was
wouldn't
no
even
engagement.
engage.
There
Mm.
was no engagement. Even today, people I know speak about it that way. Oh, this is like an anti BJP thing, or this is like an anti Modi thing. So I felt it was the audience, the urban audience,
Mm.
who are anyway cut out totally from rural India and from the farmers' livelihoods. They need to understand. And I needed to understand first before I wrote the book. So that was the process, which I'll come to later. But that
Yeah.
was the idea behind the book, for us to understand what it really meant, and why the farmers were compelled to protest and carry out one of the longest democratic protests in on the planet.
Yeah, I remember, I think about a week ago, someone on social media posted a photo of the book and said, It explains things that I have never understood so clearly. For the first time, I understand what the problem really is. And I was reading that and thinking, my gosh, this is exactly what Namita's been saying all along, that if only I can just break it down and explain things in a step by step manner. So hopefully, people will receive it that way. Arshi, moving on to you. Same question, the idea behind the book, your vision for the book. Yeah.
So, this idea was not to be, executed in a book format initially. So, the
Mm,
idea was to, like, there are two steps to it. The first step would be, I was a mohalla child. I am a mohalla child. I spent most of my life in a multicultural mohalla in Srinagar. I lived there. But you saw the mohalla changing, you saw the dynamics change. But because one was always so busy with the hard political realities and hard political questions, that
mm,
it hardly occurred to me something is happening, a major change is happening at the mohalla level as well. Conflict
right.
is doing something to our living spaces, to the co-living and whatever established living we had. And then my PhD was on very hard political questions of nationalism. I was
Mm,
looking at ethnic and civic contours of nationalism. It was
mm,
only when I moved to Berlin in 2021 that I got some time to connect these very random thoughts. A,
mm,
what was happening in mohallas. Two, it was connected to the vision of nationalism these, mohallas carried. The kind of population profile a mohalla had, the kind of life a mohalla had in the past was deeply connected to the vision of nationalism that was being played out there.
right.
And then the new changes that were introduced in last, say, after 2014, and particularly after 2019, after Article 370 was scrapped. So
Mm,
Berlin gave me some time to bridge all these intricacies and kind of get them together in one form. The idea was so loose that I thought I would just collect essays from people who want to talk about it and put it around on the website. But what happened? The website was not possible since there was a lot of mistrust here. Not everyone I contacted to write was not ready, or they did commit and then they couldn't come together. It couldn't come together in a website form because you have to keep on updating your content.
yeah.
Then I was sitting with these loose essays and some activities that I had done as part of my project in Kashmir, like going out with artists, painting visions of city. So it came together in a book format after a friend who also happens to be a publisher got had a look at it, and she said, do you know what you are sitting on? It's
You're
going to
looking
be
at a
something.
book.
You're looking at a book, you
Mm,
have no idea it can come together as a book. But the
mm.
vision is actually the life I have lived in my mohalla. I've lived in that mohalla for good 21 years of my life. That is where the vision comes from.
Right. I'm going to pose the next question first to you, Arshi.
Yeah.
Um, the process of writing the book, of bringing the book together. In your case, it was an edited volume. The introduction is by you. There is an essay. One of the essays is by you. And then you also, of course, brought other people, other people's writings into the book. And I'm also, of course, referring to what you've written in the introduction about how there were some very distressing moments as well as you were putting the book together. So, is there anything you want to talk about how very often we look at anthologies as these collectives which are empowering, but it's hard work?
I would say yes, there were moments that were very distressing, but I think the positives around it exceed far more than the negatives around it. There were moments when there was, because you live in a place like Kashmir where mistrust has been sown by
Yeah.
politically for years and years. So everybody will look at you with bit of suspicion that what are you up to and what kind of implications will it have on me.
Mm,
So one of the biggest challenge was to balance the writings in a way that it should not have an implication on either of us, because given that passports are being revoked and whatever travel
yeah.
is not allowed, so there was constant this was constantly in our head. We have to balance it in a way that either one of us should not be harmed in one way. So that was a bit challenging. Then there were moments when, as an academic who is based in the West, and you come to work in a place like Kashmir, in a conflict zone like Kashmir, you are seen with double suspicion. One, you are seen with, okay, what kind of money you are getting for this work?
Mm.
There was a
Yeah.
moment when somebody wrote to my funding agency in Berlin that what
Mm.
kind of money does this project have? And
Gosh.
and the funding agency sent the mail to me. It was very
Mm.
embarrassing also, because you clearly see, okay, you have not been able to establish trust. So it was trips and trips to Kashmir, and phone calls, and staying in touch through WhatsApp to establish that trust. If I say, if I have been able to establish some amount of trust at least, then there was this moment when a very close friend's parents family got very annoyed with me for trying to get her to Kashmir to work around these projects. But
Because she
then
was
Kashmiri
not.
Pandit,
Yeah.
because she was a
Yeah.
Kashmiri Pandit, the family moved in 1990s,
Mm.
and the family has not. They've been coming here for occasional visits. She wanted to be involved in this project in a greater role, but the family
Mm.
was mistrustful of my whatever I was doing in
Mm.
Kashmir.
Mm.
So that
Mm.
was a very distressing moment, because it kind of uh, I was sitting and I randomly get a phone call, and there are two women yelling at me. I don't know what has happened, and I'm asking what happened, and they're like, we'll report you to police. That was particularly distressing. But I would say people who came forward for various walks, for getting the visions of the city together. Young students came from a school in Shupayan in South Kashmir, very young girls. So when that kind of trust was reposed in the project, I think, I was able to overcome the difficulties and look beyond the difficulties. Or there was one other walk which we conducted with Her Pixel Story, which is a photography
Yeah.
collective
Right.
in
It's a lovely, lovely
it.
essay in the book.
Yeah, it was an unsurpassed presence.
Mm.
Like, we were walking through Lal Chowk, and security personnel is asking us, where are you going? Are you marching for something? So
Mm.
there are moments, these were moments of strength. The process in itself brought more strength than there were negatives.
Yeah, when I was reading the proofs, I felt like I'm part of a community, like a women's community. And I
Community.
was recently in this conference at Bradford. The translator of We Sinful Women was also there. And we were all talking about how women's anthologies can be very powerful spaces. I mean, they can create these very powerful books and spaces. And
Yeah.
I was telling them about Yaadgah, and to, of course, a lot of excitement. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot of such feedback from other women who want to put together anthologies as well. Neeta, I'm going to go to you with this question next, because your process has been across many, many, many years. Well, Namita's too, actually. But so tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit also about what it means to decide on an interview format, and then you are doing the interviews, and then later you decide on sticking to that interview format, so you know that everything, like, you are laying yourself transparent and accountable, in a way that many other writers might not have. So what was the process like?
I am a journalist and I have only done what a journalist does. They are my sources. They are people
Yeah.
who I trust. They have entrusted their lives into my hands. Literally.
Mm.
They've opened up and allowed me to enter into their lives.
Mm.
Uh, that is the amount of trust they have in me. They still have in me. So when I started doing these interviews and when I thought of the book and I thought of wanting to do more interviews, was because there was something going on in my mind, which was what do I bind all these, how do I get them interwoven?
Yeah.
Because they all are political opponents and they all have they've spoken up, which has become a
Yeah.
crime in this country. Today, it's even gone, it's like extended like a rubber band, which is now going to crack. but it just didn't happen overnight. So I had to see all of this in a in varied perspectives. So I kept reading their interviews. I even the giving the title to
Mm.
drive what will run through across was changing. And then I
Right.
realized that I'm looking at it from a different perspective. They, I, who are they? These are political opponents. They have opened up their lives. Who are they? The personas behind the names, behind what the police leaks are, behind
Right.
what the mass media has been telling us, which is also trying to determine how the rest of the society thinks about them, which is
Yes.
exactly what every government was trying to do. But for which
Mm.
I needed to know our laws. I needed to know which laws changed when, which were amended by who. And you also realize that every government is no different from the other. This
Yes.
was not the original idea of the current dispensation that, okay, we extend the sedition to another level, we make it so much more severe. So,
Yeah.
the mindset, I can understand that the British treated us as a colony. What I fail to understand as a journalist is when we have become a democracy, we are an independent country. They have formed laws which are for extremists, for terrorists, for avoiding any criminalization, and then they use it against their own people. Now, that is something that got me because a pediatrician, I wouldn't imagine why would any government want just because he spoke up against Salwa Judum. So everyone has spoken up. Hemalata, people didn't even know. Varavara Rao is well known globally. He's so indebted to me that I called his wife a political prisoner. And she's not just a homemaker. She was a editor. She was a publisher of a magazine and has gone to
Yeah.
jail. He was convicted. He has never been convicted in his life. So there were so many stories. The impact on them emotionally, mentally, and their loved ones. I think that is very important. Mental health. The prisoners, what they go through, and how scarred everyone is for so many years. I have seen some of their children grow from, they were in college, they were studying to now they're professionals. So I've seen their progress in life. I have seen how all of them are dealing with it. And at the end of the day, I also felt something which was positive and which I could learn and which everybody I think it will resonate with, even if they are in uh, such difficult situations, the empathy and the work that they've been doing all their lives is helping the less privileged. They continue to do that in prison, whoever it may be. Maybe
Yeah.
even if it was, I mean, we don't expect them only because they're communists. Even the other political ideology
Yeah.
people. So that is
Yeah.
actually what
Nita,
made.
yeah, it's really interesting to me that you always play down your process by saying, I'm a journalist, I did what a journalist does. And then you start talking about the people you wrote about, you interviewed, and you did precisely that, which is bring out the person behind the name and behind the news item with so much empathy and affect and care. That is not what most journalists are doing these days, if I may be pardoned for saying so. You're doing something very different, perhaps something that you were trained in because journalism was different. Do you want to say anything about that?
Yes, I should say that I'm old school journalist.
Yeah.
And I think also one thing I realized with the first interview, you have to be a good listener. In old school journalism, I have conducted interviews and I was told very precisely that just let people talk. You want to elicit something out of them. You don't have to be sitting on a judgment. You don't have to necessarily provoke. It's sometimes you just have to scratch. You might just have to pinch a little. You just have to prod them. And most of all, yes, I downplay it because I think their stories are more important. But Arpita, it was more. I was literally like a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
many of
Exactly.
them who should have taken help or spoken to counselors have first spoken to me.
Mm,
It just imagine how much they trusted.
mm.
So they are my sources. Old school journalism is they are my sources. And I protect my sources, come what may, to whatever extent I have to go to. And that's what I have.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that is important even in today's time, forgetting marketability, forgetting profits, and to, continue that trust and faith relationship that I have with my interview.
Thank you for that. Namita, same question. And I know you're resonating with a lot of what Arshi and Neeta are talking about. And I also see the word trust coming up again and again in everything that all three of you are saying. What do you want to add to that when you want to talk about the idea behind the process of putting together your book?
Yeah. Because the idea was to first of all understand the laws and understand the reason for the protests. One also needed to understand uh, agriculture and the agroeconomy in our country, which was like a huge thing
Yeah.
for me. For someone who had read a little when I did my novel, but that was a novel, it was fiction. I needed to understand a little bit and then fictionalize, but here I had to start from scratch, and the amount of literature there is overwhelming. I mean,
Mm,
journalism, there are discussions now because of YouTube videos, and especially during the lockdown, people went on to YouTube, so there were so many talks, there were conferences, uh, research papers, not just in India but even other universities abroad. It was mind boggling, and books, of course, which teach you the basics
mm,
of stuff and agriculture as well as what goes on.
mm,
But there were a few important milestones which I needed to understand. One was, of course, when did protests start in India, the farmers' protests? So I went into the history of it. So there is a chapter on the history of protests, which I in the book I've begun with 1857 and then
yeah.
so on, and some of the protests which resulted in the Indian freedom movement, and it went on till 2020 to the current, the farmers protests that we are talking about. And
Mm,
also then the green revolution, how it started, why it started, what happened, and also what led to it, and then what were the different policies at the international level, the uh, World Economic Forum and IMF, and those concepts I needed to understand. And I have not been a social sciences or economics student, so it was even tougher for me to read different versions of things to understand them. And then the 1991 economic policies that we had, and what were considered as economic reforms, but what were the backlash of that on the poorer
yeah.
communities and the poorer farmers. So to
Of
understand,
liberalization.
yeah, so I had to
Yeah.
understand all this and then put it in a way that I could sort of explain to myself and to others. And I also used some popular, let's say, the popular movies
Mm,
which had stories of farmers.
mm,
And some of them, when I had seen them in my childhood, I used to think like this must be an exaggeration, the way the zamindars were exploiting the farmers. I felt like, okay, the filmmaker is just exaggerating. And I realized that actually it's, the truth is even worse, and those
yeah.
were like real eye openers. So the process went from learning about all this and then actually meeting farmers at the protest sites, and then later going to some villages. I didn't manage to go to every state as I wanted to, but I did go to Punjab, and Karnataka and Rajasthan. And I met a lot of farmers from different states in two key conferences that I attended, which were farmers' conferences. So
Hmm.
that helped me further to speak to more people. And their voices are the main focus in most of the chapters, almost
Yeah.
all the chapters. And that's how the chapters begin. And so the process was, going through the interviews I had taken, speaking to so many people, putting them in a storytelling kind of format, and then sort of that's segues into more explanatory text about the concepts that lead to the stories that lead to the concepts. And so the process was it was actually quite mind boggling to start
Yeah.
with. But once I got the first chapter that I worked on was the three farm laws, because that was
Hmm.
like the backbone of the book.
Hmm.
But as I finished the book, I realized the backbone of the book was the invisibilized farmers,
Yeah.
and the laws were the framework rather. So so the process was like, sort of attacking in different ways, and then somehow it sort of fits into place. And then during the editing process, again, things were shuffled and it became even smoother. And
Did you at any point feel that you were, as you were writing and going through the different drafts, you were sort of distilling to the actual core of the argument you were building?
yes,
Because
very
I
much.
was there with you and I felt that's what you
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I kept feeling that when we were going through the editing process, I felt that, okay, I don't need this,
Yeah.
this is not required, but this is required. This needs to be in center, and this needs to be explained more, and this needs to be
More.
expanded. So that's how it went. uh, but at the end of it, to be honest, when I read the book now, I sometimes feel like, oh, did I really write this?
That's a good thing. That's a
Yeah,
good thought,
this
right?
thing. I mean,
Oh,
yeah, in
thank
a good
the
way.
gods.
That I feel
Yeah.
that, oh God, like, I was able to reach this point. So
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
good feeling. Yeah.
So that means now you are finally convinced that yes, it was the right thing to do. Because for my other panelists and others who are watching and listening, for the longest time, part of my job, commissioning editor, was to reassure Namita that yes, she is absolutely the right person to write this. So, what do you think about that now?
Yeah, I know. I'm so glad I took up the challenge, because initially when Arpita approached me, I was like, look, you need to look for somebody else. You need to look for
Or a
someone who is
specialist, you said.
a
Specialist, you said.
specialist. You need to look for someone who has reported on farmers for a long time, because I am not a journalist. I have not written non-fiction except for some articles in Pari, and there were some stories on farmers as well. But I'm neither a trained journalist nor an experienced journalist. In fact, I came into writing much later in life, and that too through fiction. So it was a mind-boggling exercise. Sorry to use that word again, but uh, at the end of it, I feel so happy. I feel so
Yeah,
relieved,
yeah,
and I feel it's. I mean, I'm happy that readers are going to. Some of them have told me that they have liked reading the book, but I'm also happy that I feel satisfied that I wrote something like this.
yeah, absolutely. Neeta, I want to move to you next, come back to you next. I was just thinking as I was speaking to Namita that in your book, I mean, of course, in her book as well, there is, on the one hand, we're talking about the trust that we all have to, as writers, have with our, develop with our interlocutors. But on the other, somehow, with all of you, it was the law or laws, whichever way you want to put it, right? That seems to be the binary. I mean, I know we all hate binaries these days, but that seems to be some sort of a conversation, binary like conversation I'm seeing. Particularly on your book, that idea is heightened. There is your trust that you're building with your writers and they are up against the law in a sense. Do you want to talk about that? Was that like, did you feel that that was something that kept coming up as you were sort of, finalizing the chapters?
Yes, you're right, because I had to read the laws
Yeah.
and the root of why these laws have come about, like I had mentioned a while ago. Uh, yes, the kind of laws that are being used against political opponents. Now you have sedition, you have UAPA, you have so many others that they've used, NSA. Now, for which I have to also go back. The the the
Mm,
the point in this country that has been maximized, that one blot of this country was the emergency. And every time you hear this, what about emergency? Now, today, what we are facing, especially post 2018, is even more striking and worse than emergency. So, the law and the number of people who've been arrested under that law,
mm,
which is so important.
yeah.
Imagine the number of people who have been from political parties and from the opposition parties who are facing maximum amount of ED inquiries and cases against them. Money laundering, ED, I mean, you name, and all these laws are being used against
Yeah.
who? I would think, I mean, I have covered courts, like I told you, I've covered crime in this country. Every second day was a shootout, an encounter. And here, they are not people wielding guns and going and killing someone else. They've spoken up. And because you're speaking up and you're going against the government, which has been since emergency. So if you see two of these political prisoners, I have deliberately taken and I've gone back and spoken to them. I did not choose everybody who are very popular and are well known. Is because of this. There
Mm,
has been an emergency. What were the conditions during emergency? What were the laws? There was MISA, MISA is revoked, but now we have so many others that have come in place. We are in a situation which is worse than emergency.
yeah.
So you have
I'd
to
say so.
understand these laws. You have to understand the political environment and the politics that went into creating these laws, repealing these laws, and then now you have the new Nyaya Vyavastha, which has gone beyond IPC. Uh, Apart from it being tongue twisting, it is also very, very severe. Now, what has been this political predicament and why is it?
Mm,
Which is so important. And I think with the laws comes this political predicament, this obsession to have power and
yeah.
and no opponents. So the same government, which is ruled by the BJP for the last 15 years, used one person who was known as an activist. In Maharashtra, he is not at all credible. His name is Anna Hazare. And when people, you see, he led this country. He was postured as somebody who is going to lead this country against corruption. And there is
Yeah.
no charge against him. There's no charge
Yeah.
against Makarand Bhide, the others also that are there in
Yeah,
the
also
Namita
in
Waikar.
Delhi, what played
Yes,
out after the anti-CA protests and the pogrom, and we see
Shaheen
Umar
Bagh.
Khalid is
Yes,
still in prison, and so many others in Delhi,
and
Gulfisha
journalists.
as well. Yeah,
So the number of journalists cases against them just to go and cover Hathras gang rape, and then you put them under UAPA. There is no
yeah,
justification for this extreme action.
yeah, absolutely. Arshi, I'm moving to you next. Of course, in your book, in it's sort of spatiality and memory is are these two very important motifs, but behind which actually a lot of what we are discussing is playing out as well. Because of course in Kashmir, I mean,
Yeah.
this idea of the law being used against its own people, you're well aware. I mean, everybody has lived with that for decades and decades. But how did you Even as I was reading the proofs for me, that was the astounding thing about your narrative, how you use the spatiality and memory as very genuine motifs, which you are very, very committed to in the narrative. But you also allow what is behind those, the voices and the sort of echoes from behind those two motifs to emerge so strongly, so powerful. How did you manage that, or what are your thoughts about that?
So somewhere around when Article 370 was snapped in 2019, so it was clear that you won't be able to tell the Kashmir story the way you were telling it before. You need a new language, a new articulation to tell your story, if at all you want to tell the story. Otherwise, it's going to the space has shrunk. So many people right now Neeta was talking about UAPA, like in Kashmir, so many people were just picked up and thrown here and there in jails, and
Yeah,
they are still languishing in jails. So
yeah,
for telling the story, I needed new variables, and memory
yeah.
and speciality became those two variables for me. But like in one of those essays which Meher Kadri writes, he talks
Mm,
about Mughal Masa, whose
yeah.
son was one of the first disappeared people, and she was an active part of APDP,
APDP, yeah.
Association of People of disappeared persons. And now Mughal Masa is no more. So you have
Mm,
these haunting reminiscences of last 30 years, of last 35 years.
yeah.
In one of the essays with Ragini is she's talking about the crumbling house, and she's talking about
Mm,
how the family was kind of dumped by the Kashmiri Pandits who moved out. There was no help that was coming in. There was no help that was coming in from the state. There was no help that came in from armed forces, and how family is struggling to maintain its finances and sanity. So, if you roam around Srinagar even today, you sit with somebody, there are haunting stories that come out. But there's kind of fair to articulate in these terms now, which might recede in some years, but there's fair to talk about what kind of zulm and tashaddud people saw.
mm,
So it wasn't, I think, people guided me to these motives. My interviewees, who are my strength, they guided me to these motives, rather than I having pre-decided I would use this framework for going ahead. Then the second idea that also really really helped to build this narrative was getting new voices. None of
mm,
them is previously published. Like we have seen some writing on Kashmir coming out in recent years, but these were like fresh voices, people
yeah.
nobody ever tried to sit down with and to tried to hear. So that was I think another strength that kind of built the backstory behind the
Mm,
behind the story of urban commons. We also did a small film on urban commons, how urban
right.
commons have been constricted. I mean, Yoda can use it as part of promoting the
Wow, that's
book or something. I
fantastic.
can share the film with you as how urban commons are being constricted under the garb of smart city,
Right.
because after smart city became something everybody was talking about, and everybody
Mm,
had a
mm,
memory association. That's now smart city is doing this, smart city is doing this. Earlier it used to be like this, and we associate to that aspect of the city. So I think getting a lot of fresh voices was also was a novel aspect of getting a new kind of reality coming out of Kashmir. Similarly, artists, these are all young people, uh,
yeah.
22,
Yeah, the lovely
21.
artworks in
The
your
lovely,
book.
yeah,
Gorgeous artworks. Yeah.
when I started spending time with them, I started visiting them in their university department and trying to talk to them. They were like, there are no takers for this kind of art, wherein nobody had ever asked them to draw their vision of city.
Mm,
Like I said, in my case, it was just right things coming together, and we all, coming together to create something worthwhile. It was,
mm,
I would say, it was sheer luck that I got my hand at such nice people, at such committed people.
You know, I'm always amazed and actually a little angry always to see how my women authors always diminish their own work and their own brilliance, which my male authors don't. Sorry to say, Sabine, you can keep this part or not. And always they always give the maximum share of the sort of the benefits and the responsibility, and the thank yous are towards the interlocutors, their sources, their compatriots. I guess that is a lovely thing as well. It's collaboration against competition, which is what I hope feminism still stand for. I have one last. Sorry,
One second,
Arshi,
Arpita.
I
One second,
interrupted
Arpita.
you.
I,
Yeah,
I think I give that credit to my interviewees, my compatriots, because I'm a product of such associations. This
yeah.
work would not have been possible without my working group back in Berlin, Replito. So, it was first time that it was possible for me to, okay, this kind of work can also be done, because
Mm,
I came from academics in India, and not this kind of work was not appreciated. I was in JNU. There was the space was being constricted day by day. I'm product of female friendships or female cordiality. My female friends in Berlin have ushered lot of love and trust in this project. This would not have been possible. I think that's why I just pass it on. I just try to pass
yeah.
on the positivity to the other women who have contributed to the project.
Yeah, just very glad that all the serendipity and whatever was at work brought you and your book to Yoda Press, because,
Yeah.
it's just filled us with such joy to have published all your works. And I want one last thought, which I want a quick answer from you all. Uh, I want you all to respond quickly, because I know Sabine will say the hour is almost up. Namita, go to you first. So, this whole thing of you are now emblematic of speaking truth to power. How do you feel about that? How do you respond to that?
um, I think I would say that it is speaking truth to power, but also speaking truth about power,
Ah,
about what they are
yeah,
doing and what are the implications of that, not just for the main subject, which is the farmers, but for the
yeah.
rest of us, who are the consumers of food. So I think I feel it wasn't something that I started to do. Speaking truth to power was not the main intention, but I think it
Mm,
became a part of the book, an important part of the book. And I feel good that I have played a certain role in doing that.
excellent. Neeta?
Yes, one part is speaking about the powers that are trying to scuttle the truth, where
Yeah.
at least my stories are concerned. And yes, I am very happy that my book and the whole process is in some way highlighting that speaking the truth, because I do think the truth needs to be brought out. Who these people are, what their work is, their fight for justice, and how the laws are being misused. I
Mm,
think that is so very important, because otherwise the people, the society at large thinks you have to have done something wrong. That is why you are in prison. That is
mm,
why you've been incarcerated. Their wrong is only one thing, and that is they've spoken up, which
mm.
is integral to a human being and to the fundamentals of the constitution that we have. So I am glad that if it comes across as like that.
Lovely. Arshi?
I think while my work speaks to the power, not directly through different motives, it's also collective healing for us. Sitting
Mm,
down and storytelling, telling what each of us went through, and each of us has went through our own personal hell, which
mm,
which we never talked about. For me, it's part of collective healing. Only when we get into the process of healing, we would be able to tell different stories which we are not even sure yet. Like, I really want to use this space to congratulate fellow Kashmiri women. Mehak
Mm.
Jamal has written a book, Lol Kashmir, Love and
Yeah,
Longing in
yeah, it's
Kashmir.
just come out.
Something that I used to always think, like, in something like, I've always thought about how loving in 90s used to be like. Then there's Sadaf. She has come up with with a very nice book on Srinagar again. So once it's taking power of taking, that power of telling our own stories. Our stories have been told by others for too long.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
gosh, that's such a lovely note, perhaps, for us to end this wonderful conversation on. But it's really my dream to try and get the three of you in person on a panel at some point. I think that would be just so powerful.
Inshallah.
Um, yeah, so let's just
Inshallah.
hope and pray that that happens at some point. But thank you again, not just for your time and your presence, but for your generosity, Neeta, Namita, Arshi, because, panelists can uh, clam up, sorry, on the panel and not want to share at the last minute. And all of you just let it all sort of hang out, and you wanted to kind of pass it on, as I think Ashi said earlier. Thank you for that. That means the world to me, also as your publisher and editor. And again, from the team at Yoda Press, also, we want to say a big, big thank you. Arshi, you, of course, have been in touch with Ishita and Tara, and we are only just meeting, but
Meeting.
it's been such an honor for even from a distance, to keep seeing how the book was sort of progressing, and then to actually read the proofs and to be absolutely blown away by it. Thank you for that. And
Thank you so
Namita and
much.
Neeta, we, of course, like, I feel like sisterhood. So,
Yes.
thank you, really, and hoping for
So
more
sweet.
books from all of you. I should also make that publisher's pitch at this point. And Sabine, I'm sure you're tired of all my publishing pitches, so I shall hand over to you. Thank you
Never
so much
tired.
for this lovely, lovely opportunity. Bye.
Thank you, Arpita. Thank you.
Ha.
Thank
Bye.
you.